What you want to say about the baby?
Good time, baby.
That's the voice of 4-year-old Javeayah Harris. Police say she's dead. Both of her parents are behind bars right now, charged with killing her. But this case has a twist most people covering it haven't even gotten to yet.
To make the hardest announcement that I've ever had to make in my 36 years career in law enforcement. I'm deeply saddened to tell you that our investigation and evidence leads us to believe that 4-year-old Javeayah Harris is deceased. This time, our investigation supports that she had been deceased for at least a month.
That was Sheriff Marty Sawyer, 36 years on the job, and he said that about her. Here's what's going to bother you the way it bothered me. He said she was dead with certainty on camera without a body ever being found. How do you do that? That's what we're breaking down today. Welcome to the True Crime Eye. Tell us where you're watching from. A month before anyone ever called 911, Javeayah was already gone. What happened in that month, and what her parents did to cover it, is what we're getting into right now. Let's get into it. Here's how we got here. June 30th, a little before 8:15 at night, a 911 call comes in from a house on Hillsborough Street in Aiken County, South Carolina. A mother says her daughter wandered off in the front yard, near the chicken coop, sometime while she was inside. Within hours, this stops being a local case. The Aiken County Sheriff's Office calls in the FBI. The South Carolina Law Enforcement Division joins next. Search and rescue teams move in. Drones, helicopters, K-9 units. More than 200 people on the ground before the week is out. A local church becomes a staging point. Digital billboards go up with her photo. For 4 straight days, this is the story. A 4-year-old girl missing in an entire county looking for her. Her parents are Javeayah Harris and Michelle Herring, 23 and 22 years old. They're the ones who made the call. They're the ones who gave police a description down to the color of the beads in her hair. And then, on July 4th, everything changes. Sheriff Marty Sawyer, the man you just heard, stands at a podium and tells the community what you already know. She's not missing. She's dead. And she has been for roughly a month. Not since the call. Since weeks before it. Read that again, because it's the detail this entire case turns on. The search that pulled in the FBI, that covered thousands of acres, that had an entire county holding its breath. All of it happened after she was already gone. So here's the question nobody's fully answered yet. And it's the one we're going to spend the rest of this video on. If she'd already been dead for a month, why call in at all? Why build a search around a child who was never going to be found? That question has an answer. And it starts with what investigators say happened inside that house, not on June 30th, but weeks before. On July 5th, both parents stood in front of a judge. Neither one walked out. By then, the arrest warrants were public record, and they laid out something the press conference hadn't spelled out in full. According to the documents, Javeayah died from an injury connected to abuse. Investigators tied to conduct by her mother, Michelle Herring, sometime in a window stretching from the start of May to the middle of June. That's not a single bad night. That's a window of over a month. And here's the part that turns this from a tragedy into a criminal case. Neither parent got her medical help. Not that day, not the next, not at any point investigators can find in that entire window. The warrants use a specific phrase for that. Extreme indifference to human life. That's not casual language. That's the legal standard prosecutors have to prove. Both parents are charged with homicide by child abuse. Herring is charged with something else on top of that. Filing a false police report, which means, on paper, prosecutors aren't just saying she failed to protect her daughter. They're saying the entire 911 call, the wandering off story, the search that followed, all was built on something she knew wasn't true. It's worth pausing on what homicide by child abuse actually means, because it's not the same as a standard murder charge, and the difference matters for where this case goes next. Under South Carolina law, prosecutors don't have to prove one specific violent act on one specific day. They can build a case around a pattern, abuse or neglect, sustained over time, that ultimately kills a child. Failing to get a child medical care after an injury, when that failure contributes to her death, falls under that same law. That's a lower bar in one sense and a heavier one in another. Prosecutors don't need a single smoking gun moment, but they do need to show the jury a pattern. And a pattern requires more evidence, not less. Text messages, timeline, statements from anyone who spent time around that house in May and June. That kind of case runs on a different kind of evidence than a typical homicide. Investigators aren't just looking for one moment. They're building a timeline out of things that don't lie even when people do. Cell phone location data, message timestamps, whoever last saw her in person, video or photos with metadata attached. Anything that can be checked against what the parents told police and against each other's stories. That cuts both ways, and it's worth being fair about that. This same kind of evidence is exactly what a defense attorney would use to poke holes in the state's case. Timeline gaps, conflicting witness memory, whether statements taken during questioning were fully voluntary. None of what's in a warrant has been tested in front of a jury yet. An arrest only requires probable cause, a reasonable belief a crime happened, and these two people did it. A conviction requires proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Those aren't the same bar, and getting from one to the other is what the next year, or more of this case, is actually going to be about. The charge carries a mandatory minimum of 20 years. It can carry life. And in South Carolina, when a charge carries a possible life sentence, a magistrate judge doesn't have the authority to set bond. Only a circuit court judge can. That's exactly what happened here. Both parents denied bond. Both told they'd have to wait for a circuit court date to even have that conversation. There's one more detail worth sitting with before we move forward. Herring gave birth to her second child the same night the 911 call went out. The same night hundreds of officers were fanning out across the county looking for a daughter investigators now say had already been gone for weeks. That timing isn't a coincidence anyone's explained yet, and it's about to become the center of everything. 911 call audio plays.
Ma'am, I'm at 39 Hillsborough Street. I can't find my baby.
39 Hillsborough Street.
Yes, ma'am. She was outside playing, and I came out here after cooking dinner a little bit, and I'm looking for her, but I don't see her nowhere.
Released by the Aiken County Sheriff's Office. You just heard it yourself. Every detail in that call is specific, convincing, the kind of thing a genuinely panicked parent would say. Pink Minnie Mouse pajamas, pink beads in her braids, a mention that Javeayah might be on the spectrum, though she'd never been formally evaluated, followed almost offensively by how smart she was, how well she could hold a conversation. That's not a vague story. That's someone giving searchers exactly what they'd need to find a real, specific child. And according to the warrants, none of it was true. Javeayah hadn't wandered off that night. She'd been gone for weeks. So the real question isn't whether the call sounds believable. It does. The question is why Herring made it on that particular night, and not any of the nights before it. There's a detail that starts to answer that. Herring was due to give birth any day. Hospitals ask questions when a mother arrives to deliver. How many children do you have? Where are they? Who's caring for them? That's a routine intake question, not a suspicious one. But it's a question Herring couldn't have answered honestly. And once you're about to walk into a room full of medical staff who are going to ask it anyway, waiting stops being an option. That same night, Herring went into labor. She gave birth hours after the call went out, while search teams were already fanning out across the county. There's also something worth adding here that most coverage of this case has missed entirely. Before that call was ever made, a family member, Herring's uncle, a man named Junebug, had reportedly already been texting her weeks earlier asking where Javeayah was. He hadn't seen her. He wanted to know why. Sit with that for a second. That means someone outside the house had already started asking the question investigators would spend the next month trying to answer, and they were asking it while Javeayah's parents were still going about their lives as if nothing had happened. Whether Herring answered him, whether she brushed it off, whether that conversation ever went anywhere, that's not public yet. But it tells you something important. The story that this all started on June 30th was never true, not even inside the family. Someone had already noticed. The silence wasn't an accident. It was maintained. That's a frame to carry into everything that comes next. This was a single lie told once, under pressure, in a moment of panic. It was a story that had to hold up for weeks. To a sheriff's department, to searchers, to reporters, and apparently to family who were already starting to ask questions no one wanted to answer. This is a part of the case almost nobody outside Aiken County has fully covered yet, and it's the part that changes everything. On July 9th, Sheriff Sawyer stood at another podium. This time, it wasn't to say Javeayah was missing or even that she was dead. It was to say her remains have been found, recovered from a reservoir in Fairfield County known locally as Cedar Creek Reservoir, sometimes called Stumpy Pond, for the submerged trees and timber that choked the water beneath the surface. DNA testing confirmed what investigators had already suspected. The remains were consistent with being Javeayah's. But it's what Sawyer said next that turned this from recovery into something much darker. Investigators believe corrosive chemicals and tools were used on her body, an attempt, they say, to destroy it before it was ever disposed of in that water. Both parents now face an additional charge on top of the homicide count: destruction and desecration of human remains. Take a moment with what that charge actually means, because it's not a technicality. It's a separate crime from the killing itself. Causing a death is one allegation. Deliberately working to make sure that death could never be proven, that a body could never be examined, never give up a cause of death, never be identified through anything but DNA, is another allegation entirely. One is about what happened to Javeayah while she was alive. The other is about what was done to her afterward, specifically so nobody would ever find out. To understand why this took as long as it did to uncover, you have to understand the search itself. Cedar Creek Reservoir isn't an easy body of water to work. It's choked with submerged timber and tree stumps. Good for fishing. According to locals, brutal for anyone trying to search below the surface. Sonar struggles in water like that. Dive teams have to move slowly, checking by hand in places equipment can't read cleanly. South Carolina's Department of Natural Resources led the search there, with boats, ATVs, a drone team, K9 units, and their dive unit working the water itself. The area has a single access road, restricted to law enforcement, and no cell service once you're in it. That combination, remote, difficult terrain, limited access, is exactly why a search like this takes days instead of hours, and why investigators went out of their way not to name the location publicly until they were ready. Sawyer didn't soften any of it. He said he was sickened by what investigators believe happened. He also said something worth sitting with on its own. It's unlikely the rest of her remains will ever be recovered. Not unclear. Not still being determined. Unlikely. That's a sheriff, more than a week into an active search, telling the community there may not be more to find, ever. Think about the mechanics of what that implies. A body doesn't end up broken down with chemicals and submerged in a reservoir 2 hours from home by accident. That takes planning. It takes knowing what tools to use, what would work, and where to go. Somewhere remote enough, with no cell service, a single access road, water deep and cluttered enough that recovery would be difficult even if someone knew exactly where to look. And that location isn't random. Both parents have ties to Union County, which borders the search area. Public records show rental history for both of them in that part of the state. This wasn't a stranger's dumping ground. It was somewhere at least one of them already knew. Here's why this section matters more than almost anything else in this case. Up to this point, everything. The false 911 call, the weeks of silence, the decision not to seek medical help, could still uncomfortably be argued as a spiral. Panic compounding on panic. A series of decisions, each slightly worse than the last, made by people in over their heads. That's not a defense. But it's a psychological pattern that shows up in cases like this, and it's one a defense attorney will likely lean on. The disposal is harder to fold into that same story. Chemicals aren't something you reach for in a panic. Choosing a remote reservoir 2 hours away is an impulsive decision. It's a plan, executed with a specific goal. Make sure this is never provable. That's the detail that separates a tragedy that spiraled out of control from something that looks, on paper, like it was managed. None of this has been tested in front of a jury. These are still allegations. But they're allegations serious enough that South Carolina's charge of destroying human remains exists as its own separate crime, with its own penalty, apart from homicide. specifically because the law recognizes that covering up a death is its own kind of harm. Harm to the investigation. Harm to a family that may now never get a full recovery. Harm to any hope of a definitive cause of death being entered into a courtroom. Javeayah's family has partial remains to bury, not the answers a full autopsy might have given them. According to the sheriff, all of her, whatever the state proves in a courtroom about how she died, the how would happen after, the chemicals, the reservoir, the choice of a place 2 hours from home, might be the part of this case that's hardest to ever fully explain. Javeayah's newborn sister wasn't in that house when any of this came to light. She's been placed with a family member, and the South Carolina Department of Social Services is involved in her care going forward. A judge noted that during Herring's hearing, standard procedure, the kind of detail that's easy to miss, but it means there's now a second child this case will shape for the rest of her life, one who will grow up never having known her sister at all. In Aiken, the response in the community hasn't stopped since the first week of July. A memorial outside the family's home on Hillsborough Street has kept growing.
Because they're so overwhelmed, they get these calls and they can't do anything other than just pass the baby on to someone else and someone else and someone else, and sometimes it's a family line that's continuing the
balloons rising and the community singing.
Amen. Guess what? One more time.
Stuffed animals, candles, almost everything in pink. Vigils have been held more than once, drawing hundreds of people who never met Javeayah, standing together anyway. A local restaurant owner cooked and delivered meals to search crews working the reservoir, unasked. None of that undoes anything. But it says something about a community that refused to let a 4-year-old become just a headline. If you've been with us through this whole case, that's exactly why we do this. Cases like this deserve more than a single news cycle. They deserve to be followed until there's an answer, and we intend to keep following this one. There isn't a clean way to end a case like this one, because it isn't over. Both parents are still awaiting a bond hearing. The investigation into how Javeayah died and everything that happened after is still active. And her family is still waiting on answers a courtroom hasn't given them yet. Here's what we do know. A 4-year-old girl who liked chickens and Minnie Mouse, who said, "Yes, ma'am," and "No, ma'am," because that's how she was raised, should have had an entire life ahead of her. Whatever a jury eventually decides about how that was taken from her, that fact doesn't change. If this case has stayed with you the way it stayed with us, that's exactly why we cover cases like this the way we do. Not for a single video, but until there's actually something to close the book on. We'll be back the moment there's a court date, a new development, or an answer this family deserves. If you're new here, this is the True Crime Eye. We take our time with cases like this because they deserve more than a headline. Subscribe if you want to be here for the next update. And before you go, tell us in the comments what stood out to you most about this one. Rest in peace, Javeayah.